Cool. Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to this webinar for ICT professionals interested in moving to New Zealand. You're watching this from, let's have a look, the UK, the US, Canada, South Africa. We have people joining in from Singapore, Europe, and you're all here today because you're thinking about moving to New Zealand. So you've definitely come to the right place. My name is Fabian Maisonneuve, and I'm a licensed advisor at New Zealand Shores Immigration. NZ Shores is an immigration consultancy. We're based in New Zealand and South Africa, and we have a team of 10 licensed advisors. This webinar is co-hosted by Crew Consulting, IT recruitment specialists, and the person of Rachel Tobick. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning, everybody.
Did I pronounce your name right?
Yes, you did.
Wonderful. So we also have as a panelist my wonderful colleague Charlotte Stockman, who is another licensed advisor within our team. Charlotte will discuss the latest from Immigration New Zealand and particularly what the dedicated border exemption category for IT workers means in terms of the migration process. But first, our partner Rachel Tobick, who's the recruitment side of this webinar at Crew Consulting, will kickstart the discussion. Rachel, can you please let us know what the New Zealand job market is like for IT professionals at the moment? And then we can discuss how you help candidates secure a role. And sorry, Absolutely. One last thing, if anyone has questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the webinar. Over to you, Rachel.
Sure. Well, it's a well-known fact that in the last 12 to 18 months that IT recruiters and businesses face a shortage of skilled workers in New Zealand due to our borders being closed. So there's a high degree of demand in IT, and it's coming from a lot of changing technology in businesses. There's lots of exciting new projects happening in the IT space, so it's a really exciting place to be. I guess New Zealand's talent pool for IT professionals is not really big enough to fill the volume of the jobs in the industry here. And the jobs just keep on coming in. They're definitely not slowing down. So, people are like, oh, why don't we train up more people? But, if we start training people as IT professionals today, it still takes time for those people to build their skill set and gain the experience to get them to the senior level that many of the businesses are needing to meet their demand.
Right. Okay. So, Rachel, can you tell us a bit about Crew? How long the company's been around? How long you've been with the company? Where your offices are?
Yep. No, that's cool. So, Crew Technology Recruitment is one of the few recruitment teams that specialise exclusively in IT and digital recruitment in New Zealand. Our head office is based in Dunedin, and we also have an office in Christchurch where I'm based. So both of those are in the South Island. We have a team of 12 people who are very experienced in the field. Ironically enough, I joined Crew 3 years ago and there were only actually 4 of us, so it's grown quite a lot during that time. So our team understand the IT market, the people, and the skills required, and we have the network to help find you your next dream role.
Right, okay. So your company's grown threefold in just 3 years.
Yep. It's crazy.
I suppose that illustrates how much demand there is for that kind of
absolutely.
Right, wonderful. So you've been with the company for a few years already. Have you seen any change or shift since the COVID pandemic or throughout the pandemic?
Yep, absolutely. Like everywhere else in the world, the brakes come screaming on when New Zealand had its first lockdown in March 2020. So no one had ever been through anything like this before, nor knew what to expect. But once businesses got a firm understanding of what was happening, the hiring continued, and it's, as I've said before, it's busier now more than ever, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see the potential when we see IT professionals. One of the first questions we get from prospective migrants is salaries. So how do salaries compare to, say, Europe or the US? What expectations can prospective migrants have with regards to securing a job in IT in New Zealand?
Sure. I mean, I'm really unsure of how our salaries compare to the Europe or the US, to be completely honest, but I would say it's all comparative to the cost of living. New Zealand is a relatively reasonable cost of living here. In New Zealand, our salaries across the IT sector, we've seen a steady increase in the last 12 to 18 months for the demand that's out there, which is something quite interesting. So I know you're never going to get as much as like in Dubai or some of the countries in Europe, which I know Kiwis returning home, but it's all about the cost of living and
yeah, but
relative.
a lot of people move to New Zealand also for the quality and the work-life balance.
Absolutely. Yep.
Living, for sure. Okay. Okay, let's discuss how your company, how Crew, can assist with securing a role. What kind of what companies do you recruit to?
We recruit for businesses right across the board, from small businesses to enterprise-sized businesses. And types of roles we look to recruit for. There's huge demand for software developers. That's the domain that I specialise in. I know it's really hard at the moment. Business intelligence and analytics, business analysts, project managers, testers, program managers, anything in the systems, networking, service desk type space, you name it. We're probably looking to fill those roles.
Right across the board then.
Absolutely. Yep.
As far as IT is concerned. How does Crew Recruitment assist prospective candidates right through from CV to the interview process?
Yep, sure. So we're a friendly bunch of people, so we guide you through the process from start to finish. So upon receiving your CV, one of our friendly consultants, whoever's domain that sits in with your skill set, will set up a video call to go over your experience and chat about potential opportunities with our clients here in New Zealand. So we'll give you some advice on your CV and suggest any changes if required, things that will help you and aid you, put your best foot forward for the job. We'll then present your CV to the employer after we've discussed some options with you and guide you through the interview process, holding your hand throughout the way and keeping up the communication along the way as well.
What do you need to look out for in a CV? A lot of people are or resume, as they call them in the US,
Yep.
A lot of people are mindful that there can be some variations from one country to another. What's a typical great looking New Zealand CV? Do you want as much information as possible? See, like 12, 14 pages? Do you need a photo on it? How does that work?
You can put a photo on it if you want to, but normally just basic details like your name, obviously your country, a bit of a paragraph about you and what your motivations are to move to New Zealand, and I guess what your experience is in the field that you're looking for a role in, because it's your best chance to put a foot forward and to sell yourself to a potential employer as well. And then I keep it to 2 or 3 pages if you can, because honestly, we see a lot of CVs and when they get longer and it's really hard to read the long ones. So keep it short and sharp. So, you'll have the company, where it was, the dates you worked, and maybe put something like, what were your key responsibilities in that role? What technologies you use? What were your key achievements that you did?
And you assist with that CV reformatting as well, to some extent?
Yes, we can help with that as well.
Okay, wonderful. That's something that New Zealand Shores does as well, but more from a migration perspective.
Yep.
I've got a good question from Peter there in the chat. Given that your offices are in Dunedin and Christchurch, do you only recruit to the South Island or to the North Island as well?
We did start off recruiting into the South Island, but now obviously things have got busy. A lot of our clients down in the South Island have offices in the North Island and just through our networks as well. So we don't do too much in the North Island, but we do get some work in the North Island as well. And there are, I guess, opportunities for some remote roles as well, like within New Zealand. So I know Dunedin, for example, they really struggle to find software developers. So they will look outside of Dunedin within New Zealand for other locations.
Okay. I have another question from Helena in the Q&A. Cybersecurity is a big thing at the moment. Do you recruit in that field as well?
Yes, we do. At the moment, I know it is a big area to recruit in, but so we're most certainly keen to speak to anybody about that, because I know that's big for some of our clients as well.
Okay. Yeah, I had a look at the profiles of people who attend the webinar. There's quite a lot of people highly skilled in cybersecurity. Okay, great. That sounds very promising. Thanks, Rachel. We'll come back to the recruitment shortly. Before I let Charlotte take over, I just wanted to provide a brief reminder of the usual immigration process. So before the COVID pandemic, people, prospective migrants would typically secure a role with a New Zealand company from overseas. Then they would apply for a work visa from overseas and then travel to New Zealand on their work visa. With COVID, the New Zealand government has applied severe restrictions on border entry. Let's be clear, the border is not closed, but only people who meet very specific criteria can enter. So that would be obviously New Zealand citizens and residents, but also a fairly wide range of skilled professionals. At NZ Shores, we've brought many people through the borders throughout the pandemic, largely health professionals, but also other occupations, as the government keeps adding special classes. So we've got teachers, construction managers, dairy farmers, for example, all jobs in very high demand. And the main reason for this webinar is that the government is about to issue a new border exemption for IT professionals, and that potentially could allow you to move to New Zealand even before the borders fully reopen. Charlotte, now turning to you, can you give us a brief review of the IT profiles of the people we've done visas for throughout the last 5-6 years, for example?
Oh, hi everyone. As Fabian said, I am Charlotte from New Zealand Shores, one of our licensed advisors who has been working quite closely with a lot of different border exemption criteria over the last 2 years. So I can apply what I've learned to every other class of worker and hopefully target it to the IT sector when things start to open. So gosh, that's a very broad question there, Fabian. Everyone ICT related, I've probably done a visa for. But yeah, definitely a lot of people in those 4 main groups that immigration have stood up this exemption for. So just to cover that off, and these are quite broad titles too, but software and application programmers, ICT managers, ICT security specialists, and then multimedia specialists as well. So I would say the vast majority of the people we have worked with have slotted under those 4 criteria, but of course there's always people outside of those criteria in all different types of ICT roles that we've worked with.
Okay, can you tell us very briefly what the current state of things is like with Immigration New Zealand at the moment, and then we'll pop a presentation on screen.
Yeah, so like Fabian said, our border has been highly restricted for the last 2 years almost, which has obviously made things a little bit different to the usual process which you've just outlined before. And what it will look like for anyone in this webinar who does get a border exemption under this new criteria for the tech sector, basically you'll receive a skilled job offer. We then apply for the border exemption request, or it's also called an expression of interest to immigration. And that's basically where we declare information about you, your job, you know, where you're going in New Zealand, and immigration will assess that, and they will say, yep, great, you meet the criteria, and they will invite you to apply for what's called a critical purpose visitor visa. So that critical purpose visitor visa is the visa that facilitates entry to New Zealand at the moment while the border is restricted. We can't go through the usual process of applying for work visas outright from offshore. The system just doesn't allow us to do it. So we apply for the critical purpose visa. You enter into New Zealand on that visa, and then once you're onshore, processing is kind of the way it's always been. So we can apply for work visas for the person with the job. If you have a partner traveling with you, your partner will also obtain an open partnership work visa. And if you have children traveling with you, they will either obtain a longer term visitor visa if they're under the age of 5, or they'll obtain a student visa if they're 5 or older. So those temporary visas, which is what we call work and student and visitor visas, will be issued for 3 years. And they give you all sorts of benefits, like your children can attend school as domestic students, you'll receive free healthcare, and they're basically the best visa to be on while you're waiting for residence. So I will chat over the residence criteria through the PowerPoint because it's a bit more nice diagram. I can explain it a bit better.
So let me pop that presentation on screen then. Right, so it's the migration to New Zealand, or any other country for that matter, starts with proper preparation, doesn't it? What do you need to look into, and how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is always certain documentation you're going to need when you're migrating, no matter whether you're migrating here or Australia or Canada or anywhere else in the world, you're going to have certain documentation in place. So for New Zealand specifically, throughout this process, it's things like passports, your birth certificates. You're going to need evidence of your qualifications if you have them. You're going to need evidence of your work experience history. If you have a partner traveling with you, you're going to need to prove you're in a genuine and stable relationship. But that's all things that we can guide you through. So New Zealand Shores actually provides you with, it's about a 15-page document which outlines all of those documents in detail. And people who start the process with us quite early on, we guide them to a point where they have all of that documentation ready before they actually start job searching, or they kind of run it in parallel so that when a job offer is received, you've got everything you need. You're not scrambling around trying to apply for police certificates or get a birth certificate that you suddenly find out it's going to take 4 months to obtain. You've got all of that ready. So that's, from our point of view, that is the best step to take, is get all of that ready before you start job searching. But then not everyone will work it like that. So some people may come to us when they've already got a job, which just means we have to work with you really closely and quickly to make sure you get all of those documentation in place so we can apply for a visa or border exemption as quickly as possible.
Right. So in most cases, people approach us with the intention of moving to New Zealand. That's when we pick up their documentation, have a look, see what's missing, see what's needed. Then they work with a recruiter, such as Crew Consulting, for example, to secure a role. And once they have that role, we can apply for the visa, right? And very soon, there will be a new border exemption that allows to apply for a visa on the basis of a role in IT with the purpose of moving to New Zealand on a critical purpose visa. Cool. So these are the few steps that Charlotte has gone through. You've got the skilled job offer. On that basis, on the basis of the new border exemption for IT professionals, you do, well, we do for you an expression of interest, which we commonly refer to as an EOI. Once the request has been granted, we apply for a critical purpose visa. As Charlotte mentioned, you can include your family. And then depending on the state of regulation at that point in time, you might be able to self-isolate upon arrival in New Zealand or go through a managed isolation and quarantine facility, which is MIQ. Charlotte mentioned the need to apply for longer term work visas. While in New Zealand, this is actually what you would be applying for from overseas if it wasn't for border restrictions. But now you apply for these while on shore, and the family can get visas as well on the basis of their relationship with the principal applicant. Moving on from here, what are residence options, Charlotte?
Yeah, so residence options look a little bit different right now. Just because at the end of September last year, Immigration New Zealand announced what was called the 2021 resident visa. So that was stood up basically as another option, one, to clear some backlogs which immigration had with residence processing across a couple of categories, and two, is a streamlined and fast option for people who are coming in, well, who have either come or who are coming into New Zealand prior to the 31st of July 2022 as critical workers. So that covers things like Fabian said, healthcare workers, teachers, people coming in to work on major infrastructure projects, and it will also include anyone who is able to obtain a visa under this border exemption criteria for tech sector workers. So if you are to get a place, one of those 600 places, obtain your critical purpose visitor visa and arrive in New Zealand prior to the 31st of July 2022, you will be able to apply for that 2021 resident visa. So there's a few benefits to it. There's no points-based eligibility. So you're not having to sort of provide a lot of evidence around your work experience and your qualifications. Immigration would have already assessed that as part of you coming in as a critical worker. You're not, if you've already provided police certificates with those temporary visa applications, you're not having to get new ones for the residence application. There is no age cutoff, so it is the only resident visa, I think almost ever for skilled migrants that doesn't actually have an age cutoff. So typically you have to apply for residence prior to turning 56. Under this 2021 resident visa, it doesn't matter, you just have to be a critical worker. What else? No English language tests. So yeah, it is quite a bit more straightforward. But if you happen to arrive into New Zealand after the 31st of July, 2022, we will revert back to the skilled migrant residence category, which has been the main residence category that the majority of skilled workers have applied under for probably about the last 10 to 15 years. And it will become the preferred pathway to residence for skilled workers. So it does have a points-based eligibility. At the moment, you need to be able to claim 160 points or higher in order to be eligible. We are expecting a policy change on that, which could potentially see those points being increased. Points are based on things like age, your qualifications, your work experience history, your salary is another one. So a lot of people in this group would probably fit into that high remuneration category. So you'd be able to claim extra points for your high salary. What else have I missed, Fabian? If you get a job offer outside Auckland, if your partner has qualifications, so there's a whole raft of things in there that you can claim points for. So there will definitely still be a pathway to residence after the 31st of July. It's just going to mean a bit more paperwork and it is a bit more time intensive. So average processing time could be, well, we don't know actually under what the new skilled migrant, when they resume processing, we don't know what it will look like, but it could be probably somewhere between 12 to 18 months potentially. Whereas with the 2021 resident visa, everyone will process within 12 months.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Charlotte. So for clarity again, all of these criteria about qualification, work experience, English language, this is all for the skilled migrant points-based residence category. Before the end of July, if you can secure a role and make it to New Zealand, we'd strongly be recommending the new 2021 resident visa, which is a lot faster and streamlined, because the main reason this came into existence is to clear the huge backlog that Immigration New Zealand has with residence applications. Just a few minutes ago, you mentioned a quota, Charlotte, of 600 professionals in IT who will qualify for border exemptions. So essentially to come to New Zealand before July. Are there any specific occupations in ICT that will qualify for border exemptions?
Yeah, there definitely are. So I'll just run over that. So this was announced back 15th of December last year. We haven't actually seen, we haven't seen any new information in the new year, but we do have a really good indication of what that criteria is going to be. So they're targeting areas of the sector which they see as most in need for overseas talent, which includes software development, product managers, cybersecurity, and interactive media. It comes under 4 categories of workers. So Immigration New Zealand use a classification system called ANSCO, which basically gives very broad titles to occupations. So I'm about to give you 4 occupation groups. Bear in mind, you don't actually have to obtain a job offer that has this occupation title, because what happens is we look at a job description and we then look at ANSCO and we say, okay, you've got all of these different things as part of your job description which substantially match this occupation title in ANSCO. So what your job title may be and what your ANSCO title may be, generally they don't align. You know, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different occupation titles out there, and ANSCO and immigration can obviously not have that many things that they use to classify occupations. But the broad titles they will use, so there's software and application programmers, ICT managers, ICT security specialists, and multimedia specialists. They will also attach salary thresholds to that. So for software and application programmers, ICT managers, and ICT security specialists, you'll need to be earning at least 120,000 per year. And multimedia specialists will need to be 95,000 a year or higher. We are obviously waiting for, I guess, the tech sector and the government to work out the specific little tiny details for the scheme, but we're hoping to have something, I guess, probably in the next month or so.
So we actually have a really good question in the Q&A from Jose. 600, do you think it's first come, first served, or is that points ranked? We do know it's not points ranked, but there are specific criteria to be met, isn't it?
Yeah, generally, I think it probably will be first come, first served, which I guess is kind of how a lot of things with immigration work. Everything goes into queues, and wherever you fall in that queue is how your applications will be processed. But, you know, we don't know within that criteria, we don't know if there'll be certain occupations that'll process first, or are they going to attach different criteria to, I guess, you know, attach a hierarchy to how that processes. But these are the things we don't yet know. So like I said, immigration's released this information, but the criteria and the information they've given us so far is quite limited. So I guess watch this space and we can see what else comes out.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's no age, well, there has never been an age limit for work visas, but that specific residence category doesn't even have an age limit, which is, you know, unheard of in immigration history for New Zealand anyway. A lot of people are very experienced, but they're coming close to the 50 or 55-year kind of threshold. And I'm going to turn to Rachel for that question, because people are concerned about rather than their eligibility for visas, they're concerned about their employability beyond the age of 50. So a 50-year-old systems architect or IT engineer, is that viewed as a person that's no longer really employable, or who's really senior and whose experience is highly valued?
I'd say they'd be highly valued, you know, by a lot of clients out there. Yeah.
And would that person be put in charge of projects, for example, or mentoring younger teams?
Yeah, I mean, if they've got like 20, 30 years experience kind of thing, which, you know, someone, if they've been in the IT sector that long, I mean, it could be like a head of role, or, you know, in charge of people, or, yeah, I think it would be quite a high up role. Yeah, for someone with that level of experience.
Right. Another question from Jose regarding that quota and the salary threshold of $120,000. Is that the same threshold regardless of the region? Our understanding is that yes, but again, as Charlotte mentioned, we have not seen the actual operational instructions come through. So whatever we have to work off at the moment is the announcement. I don't believe it will be region-based.
I think, sorry, I'm just going to jump in there. I think it is also worth noting, like last year when we saw the border exemption border exemption category announced for teachers, they did attach quite strict criteria to it. And I think so that they were going to allow 300 teachers into the country. And that criteria was so minimal that they actually only saw 100 teachers approved. So as of last week, they've actually widened that criteria substantially. So look, we don't know, that could happen with this as well. They may initially focus on salaries of that range, but then they may drop it down, or they may, you know, they may play with the criteria depending on how much demand they see, that, you know, for that specific criteria initially.
We can hope they're going to learn from that teacher's exemption exercise and possibly keep it as wide as possible to actually allow those IT workers to come through, because 600 is a large quota, and that really goes to say that there is a critical shortage of that kind of profiles in New Zealand. Great. I just wanted to pop the presentation on screen again to have our contact details, because sometimes people have questions that are, or circumstances that are very personal. They may not be willing to put them out in the chat or in the Q&A. So if you have any question about the immigration process, the visa, documentation, how we can help, you can contact info@nzshores.com. And if you have any question regarding job opportunities, CV format, CV rewriting, the kind of roles by region, you can contact Rachel at Christchurch at crewconsulting.co.nz, and Rachel or any of her team will come back to you with some answers. Let's have a look at the other questions we've got under here. Right, what I like with IT is that people are getting very specific in the kind of job they have. So we have a lot of these questions. Question from David, for example, are cybersecurity sales engineers are as desirable as the standard cybersecurity consulting roles, or are they different?
Very good question. Unfortunately, I don't work in that particular area, so I'm not best placed to answer that question. But yeah, I can certainly go away and find out the answer for that.
Okay, I'd recommend then that David contacts Christchurch at Crew Consulting.
Yeah, that's right.
And pick up that conversation. I suppose the question about aerospace engineers, electrical engineers will be the same. Not so much crew's domain, is it?
Not really, no.
Okay, I do know for a fact though that there is demand in that space. Anything
yes, there is. Yep.
Anything engineering is in high demand in New Zealand. That's
absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. In terms of certification or qualification or recognition of prior learning, what is widely accepted in New Zealand? I know we've got Cisco certifications, Microsoft certifications. These traditionally don't really count much in terms of immigration qualification, but they might be highly sought after by employers. Can you shed a bit of light on that, Rachel?
Yeah, you're probably right there. Like the Cisco and the Microsoft qualifications are pretty well regarded in the industry. So yeah, if someone has those particular qualifications, again, because I do software developers and stuff, I'm not really placed to answer like on the other side of it. But if someone does want to know specifically, feel free to drop an email and one of the team will be able to pick that up and answer your question.
What about data analytics? Is that something that's also in high demand?
Absolutely. At the moment, I've got quite a few roles in the business intelligence data analytics space. So I think like if we look back a few years ago, when I first started out my career, like companies weren't spending so much money on data analytics because they're kind of like, oh, why do we want to spend that much money? But it's so valuable delving into their data and figuring out where they can make cost savings and just a wealth of information. So yeah, definitely a lot of companies are investing in that. Okay,
thanks, Rachel. Moving away from the recruitment side of things, a very relevant question. Do you have to be vaccinated to enter New Zealand? Charlotte, I see you answered that one, but it's probably an answer for everyone.
Yes, so from the 1st of November last year, everyone except New Zealand citizens must be fully vaccinated for COVID-19. That doesn't extend to other types of vaccinations, just COVID at this stage.
Okay, so yeah, absolutely mandatory. And in terms of the process, so let's say you work with New Zealand Shores with the documentation, you work with Crew Consulting to secure a role. You do secure a role that seems to tick all the boxes. Who will request a border exemption? Who will raise the critical purpose visa? Is that the candidate or the company if the job is offered? Maybe that one's for you, Charlotte.
That is one of the things we're still waiting to hear on. So with teachers, for example, the border exemption process was handled purely by the school that was hiring them in the Ministry of Education. Whereas for healthcare workers, for example, that border exemption is handled directly through the Immigration New Zealand website. So it's something we take care of for our clients. When you're invited to apply for the critical purpose visitor visa, that's definitely where we can jump in if that border exemption request is perhaps managed directly by the employer or by an industry body.
Okay, great. So you come here to New Zealand on a critical purpose visa. And then, as we mentioned, you apply for the usual work visas. The name was Essential Skills. Can you remind us how long these are granted for and the key benefits that you get, namely in terms of schooling for the kids and health, for example, health cover?
Yeah, so those essential skills work visas and the associated partnership work visas and student or visitor visas are granted for 3 years. your children will be able to attend school as domestic students. So that means your children would attend school the same way that any New Zealand citizen's child would. Our education is virtually free, obviously, unless you send your child to a private school, and then private schools are a course you pay for. But for our public education system, it's great. I think just about everyone in this office who has children sends their kids to a public school. So, you know, none of us are really taking preference over private schools. And you pay basically a $100 to $200 donation to the school per year per child. So it is quite cheap comparative to private school, which could be tens of thousands of dollars a year. What else? Oh, healthcare, sorry. Healthcare is basically free. So we have a really great healthcare system in New Zealand. You will get free healthcare from the moment you hold that 3-year visa. GP visits for under 13s are free. Prescriptions at the pharmacy cost like $5 per prescription. And if you get sick or injured and you need to go to hospital, then that is fully covered. So it's you don't have to hold private insurance. Obviously some people choose to, you know, perhaps if you're from America or countries that don't have that same kind of healthcare system, you might be used to having private insurance and they want to continue that on, but you don't necessarily have to.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. Another question for you, Rachel. Working from home, is that really common or even natural or the norm now in New Zealand, particularly after, you know, in the light of the COVID pandemic? Can someone expect to be working from home a couple of days a week if they're fully employed?
Yeah, depending on the role, but we are seeing a lot more flexibility to work from home. Like some of our clients have, they'll do like a couple of Team Connect days in the office a week, and then the other 3 days you can choose to work from home or be in the office, depending what you prefer as a person. But then again, it all depends on the job. So like if you're an engineer that's going out in your car, you know, doing break fixes for clients, you know, obviously you wouldn't be able to work from home because you don't have the opportunity to do that from home.
Sure.
But, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. A question from Venkata, who is asking whether there is a job seeker category of visa available. Unfortunately, no, there is no job search visa available. Never really has been, not in terms of a tourist visa that will allow you to look for work. However, maybe Charlotte, you might want to discuss through options. Obviously, once borders fully reopen, how could a person potentially come to New Zealand, look around for jobs? What are the options there?
Yeah, so there isn't, like Fabian said, there isn't a specific job seeker visa, and you, for the record, cannot apply for a work visa without first having skilled employment. So that is a question we get asked all the time. What you can do though, so once border restrictions start to ease, which I read an article this morning saying the government's predicting that's going to happen significantly in the first half of this year, which is also news. So once that does start to happen, what you can do is you can apply for a visitor visa. If you're from, so yeah, sorry, backtrack. There's 2 options. So there's some people who can enter New Zealand without having to apply for a visitor visa first. Or there's some people from certain countries that have to apply for a visitor visa first. So if you are in the group where you don't have to apply for a visitor visa before traveling, when you arrive at the border and an immigration official or a customs official asks you what your purpose for travel to New Zealand is, you don't necessarily tell them you're coming to look for work, but what you say is you're coming to look, see, and decide. So you're coming to look and see if New Zealand's a place that you would like to live, and then, you know, decide if that's, you know, where you want to be and where you want to work. It's really important that you do actually tell someone that at the border, because it's likely that notes will be made on your file. And if it's found that you turned up to the border and said, I'm coming on holiday or I'm coming to visit family, and then later make a work visa application, it could actually come around to bite you, because immigration would say you weren't entirely truthful. If you are someone who has to apply for that visitor visa before you travel, you just declare the same thing in your visa application. You're coming to look, see, and decide. And once again, if you don't put it in your visa application, it could come back to bite you when you apply for a work visa. So yeah, it's the best way, I guess, to get around coming to search for work. You are able to come and search for work in New Zealand as long as you've declared that look-see and decide intention. And you can actually apply for a work visa while you're still onshore. And once again, as long as you said you're coming to look-see and decide, you've declared that intention to immigration. So if you do apply for a work visa while you're still in New Zealand on that visitor visa, you're not going to get pulled up about it.
Right. And again, everything you've just said is once borders fully reopen to tourists. In the present case, the only way to come to New Zealand is to secure a role from offshore. On that topic, Rachel, people have seen many IT jobs on Seek or Trade Me jobs, but when they apply, the response they get is, you don't have work rights, you don't have rights to work in New Zealand, our borders are closed, we cannot proceed with your application. Is that the feedback you're getting from employers, or are they actually willing to look for offshore candidates?
It's a little bit hard at the moment, I guess, because there's so much uncertainty and people are waiting to see what happens with this border exemption for the IT workers. I did see an email on Friday from NZ Tech, so there must be something happening behind in the background with it. But yeah, at the moment it is difficult to do that. That's what we're seeing from clients. I guess, it's hard.
Yeah. But we would assume, similar to the teachers or the health workers, once the border exemption has actually been properly documented and explained in detail, employers will be a lot more open to looking at offshore.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, because they don't really have a choice anyway. The skill set is just close to non-existent in New Zealand. Why New Zealand, Rachel? Why would you want to come and work in New Zealand? Can you sell it for us in a few sentences?
Yep, no, that's cool. So why New Zealand? I guess where do you start? New Zealand's a fantastic place. The people are really friendly and welcoming in New Zealand. Great opportunities in IT, so your skills are in demand. And as you're alluding to, quite often we'll get CVs from overseas people that have applied via Seek. You're like, damn, I wish the borders were open because that person looks amazing. But hands are kind of we're tied at the moment until that comes into effect. Very family friendly. It's a great place to bring up a family. I have 2 children, a teenager and a preteen, and we love getting out and exploring and taking our wee dogs along for the journey. It's such beautiful scenery here, and there's so much to explore. We spent a week over the Christmas holidays down in central Otago, and it's all these things on our back door step. Normally we'd head overseas at Christmas, but we obviously can't. There's a high quality of living compared to other countries. A low cost of living as well, an excellent public schooling and health system.
Wonderful. So if someone ticks all the boxes, has a job that is in high demand in New Zealand, and they want to approach Crew with a view to secure a role through you guys, how do you work? Do they pay any fees to you as a recruitment agent?
No, we don't. We don't charge them at all for our services. Our clients actually pay us to find really good people for them. So it's a completely free service that Crew offer.
Okay. And what about immigration consultancy, Charlotte? Can you, in a few sentences, explain to prospective clients how we assist, if there's any fee associated, and what's the extent of our service?
Yeah, so we do charge a service fee just because there's no third party paying us, unfortunately. Would love to be able to offer our services for free, but we just can't. So yeah, there is a fee attached. Our fees do vary on a number of things. Is it just you? Are you traveling with family? Do you have any health or character concerns which require extra attention from us? Because some of those things do trigger extra submissions to Immigration New Zealand. But our service, basically, you will generally pay one fee right from, from the moment you engage to us to the moment you get your residence visa. So for some of our clients, that could be like a 5 or 6 year process. I just had a family get residence this morning. They had been clients for 5 years. So they have had a lot of support over that time for various different things. Basically, our service is that we take that immigration processing off your hands. We give you guidance on your documentation, we check it all and find the gaps. We'll say, great, you've got everything, or no, you need more of X, Y, Z, and that's tailored to you and your family situation. Once you get a job offer, we obviously then, you know, if in this situation, if we're able to prepare the border exemption, we will. We prepare and submit the critical purpose visitor visas. We prepare and submit your temporary visas. We prepare and submit your residence application. We do all of the liaising with Immigration New Zealand. So if there's extra requests for information, you know, we manage all of that. We break down all of their technical terminology to say, well, actually, you know, they've given us this 2-page letter, but all you need to provide is this one thing. So we're the middleman, basically, for lack of a better term, between you and immigration. What else do we do, Fabian? We do provide a little bit of, we call it job search support, but that would never ever replace someone like Crew Consulting. It's quite limited in what we can do. So we do provide you with a formatted CV. Whether or not you use that's up to you. We give you cover letter templates, which of course Crew can probably provide better than we can, but you know, it is there to at least make a start off. We can also ring up employers. So especially with this border exemption stuff, there will be a lot of employers who aren't 100% sure on what goes on. So if you've got an employer who says, great, I really like the look of you, I want to hire you, but I don't know what to do next, that's when you could give them our details. We can pick up the phone, explain it to them, or send an email and explain it to them. And you know, hopefully that might make the difference between you getting that job and being able to come to New Zealand before the border opens, you know, rather than not getting that job. Once the border does start to sort of ease for skilled workers, our functionality will virtually be the same. So we will still be able to, you know, ring up employers who aren't sure about the visa process, or they aren't sure if skilled workers can enter, or whatever it might be, and we can just talk them through what things look like at that particular time.
What's best in the job of a licensed advisor is maybe the personal relationship that you develop with your clients, because as Charlotte pointed out, it is an emotional roller coaster moving to a new country, and more often than not, we actually are in frequent contact with you guys for several years, you know, and we hold your hand from the initial, what document do I need, all the way to, hey, I'm here, finally, okay? As a matter of fact, a lot of our clients, we, sure enough, only meet for the first time as they land in New Zealand, start their role, and pop by the office for coffee. So that's always, yeah, a great feeling. Rachel, going back to recruitment for a second, how can someone prepare for reference checking? What's your advice on that point?
So reference checking is pretty easy. So we ask that you provide your references that someone from Crew will be in contact with via email. So we use an online platform, which really helps with the time difference, because they can obviously do it in their own time as well. And we can sometimes, you know, flick it off before the end of our day and we've got it back in the morning, which is fantastic. You know, you need to get a reference to support your application for a new role in New Zealand. So once you've provided these details, we'll then submit the reference request to the person to complete online.
Okay, great. Charlotte, I see that you flagged a few questions in the Q&A to answer live, so I'll let you do that.
Yeah, I just figured they're probably questions that a lot of people would like to hear the answer to. So Kevin has asked, is there any support for finding a place to live before or once you've arrived? It's not really something we offer. We do provide kind of like a general settlement guide, which has, I guess, tips and tricks about different things like finding rental properties and opening bank accounts and taxation numbers and all those kinds of things. But the one thing I generally do recommend to all of my clients is when you know where you're going, when you know where your job is and you've got that visa approved, look to book an Airbnb or similar for probably at least a month. If you're moving to a new place that you've never been to before, you're not going to really have any idea of where to live. And for example, you know, Rachel can probably provide feedback on where's a great place to live in Christchurch, and we can provide feedback on where's a great place to live in Hamilton. But if you end up in any of those other places, if we haven't lived there, we don't actually know. So I could look at a map and pick out a suburb and it could be horrible. So get an Airbnb for the first month, because you don't want to find that work's here, the kids are going to school over here, and then home's all the way over here. So get an Airbnb. Once you've started work, talk to people who you work with. You know, they'll know the good schools, they'll know the good suburbs to live in. They will be your most valuable source of information.
And New Zealand's one of the youngest countries in the world. It's very much built on new migrants. I'd be surprised if you didn't find easily a community of like-minded people like you coming from the UK or South Africa, who will probably be providing a lot more personal insights into where you're going to be landing in New Zealand. Some advice on the schools, because their kids go to that great school, which happens to be within your zone. So yeah, have a look online. There's a plethora of Facebook forums and the likes. And your new employer is also, or new colleagues, very likely to be providing a helping hand with all those tiny bits and pieces that are actually very important. Back to you, Charlotte.
So the other question we've got from someone is, how easy is it to extend a visa after 3 years? Absolutely, as long as you still meet Immigration New Zealand policy at that time, you're not able to extend a visa, but you're able to apply for a further 3-year visa. The only thing that we always warn people about is that Immigration New Zealand policy can change at any time. So just because you got a 3-year work visa based on one set of policy doesn't mean that that policy is going to look exactly the same in 3 years. So if your intention is to remain in New Zealand permanently, or even probably for the a 5-year period, it's worth applying for residence. Once you've got residence and permanent residence, you're able to leave the country and come back whenever you feel. So if it's kind of a long-term plan, definitely apply for residence as soon as you can. But if you're not sure, so perhaps you might just want to come for a couple of years and see how it pans out and then make a decision, by all means you can still apply for a further visa at the end of that initial visa duration.
Wonderful. Were there any other that you wanted to answer there?
I'm not sure. No, I think the rest of there are probably more Rachel questions than me questions.
Rachel, anything tech support, ICT testing, supports engineers, is that also something you'd happily look at?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, as we can see, there are lots of job opportunities in the IT sector, and the kind of job you might secure is pretty varied. So yeah, just before we wrap things up, I suppose I'll be asking both of you guys, what are the best things about living in New Zealand, and what are the potential challenges that you might be facing? Rachel, over to you first, maybe.
Yeah, as I've said before, the people in New Zealand, everyone's really friendly here. Yeah, and making people fit in. I mean, I come across people from different countries every day in my role, and it's so nice to hear how their families settling in, to New Zealand, from where they've come from.
And the challenges would be the actual process of relocating rather than settling in?
I guess, moving to another country always has its challenges. So, obviously you're leaving your friendship group behind. The kids are leaving their friends at school behind. You've got to find a job for your partner if you're bringing them with you. You might be leaving your family behind as well. But there are many local groups here in New Zealand, in all areas of New Zealand actually, that help you with this, and we can help put you in touch with the right people, make suggestions to you. I mean, let's face it, moving house and changing jobs are two of the most stressful things you can do in your lifetime. So adding and moving across the world to a new country and a new community, it doesn't really make it easier, but we're here to help. And we can share stories of people we've helped with, and help you make connections to make the move as stress-free as possible.
Okay. Charlotte, what about you? What do you think the best things are about living in New Zealand, and the challenges that you probably see firsthand from all of our clients on a daily basis? What's the feedback there?
Gosh, the best thing about living in New Zealand, I'd have to agree, the people. Everyone's so friendly, and a lot of my clients always comment on that fact as well, is how friendly people are, how welcoming people are. If you turn up to, I've had clients arrive in New Zealand and their container's been delayed by a few weeks, and suddenly they've got offers left, right, centre for pots and cutlery and plates, and I've got a couch you can borrow, and all sorts of things. So people will readily offer help. Plus everyone's really welcoming. So, people will offer to babysit your children, perhaps if you've got no other support network in New Zealand, or they'll offer to feed your cat while, you've gone away, or whatever it might be. People will always readily volunteer their time. New Zealand is beautiful too. I think everyone who knows anything about New Zealand knows it's absolutely stunning. it's been, like Rachel was saying, spending time in your own backyard while we haven't been able to go overseas has actually been really cool. Typically, I would go overseas once a year as well on holiday. Like that would be my big holiday every year, and I've been forced to spend time at home, and I've actually really, really enjoyed it. And I don't think I'll ever regret that. So that's been really cool too. Challenges, like Rachel said, you're moving to a new place. It's never going to be exactly the same as what home is. You know, we're not that different to a lot of other Western countries, but of course we're always going to be a little bit different. And whether it's that the housing's different, or you might have to drive on the other side of the road, or the kids have to settle into school, or there may be a little bit of a language barrier if English isn't your first language, whatever it might be, there's always going to be some challenge. But I've probably only had maybe 4 or 5 families go home in the last 7 years. So, and that's out of hundreds of families that I've helped migrate. So I think that goes to show that it's, you know, there isn't really many reasons to leave. Yeah, I think you've got to give yourself 12 months at least to kind of settle in, get used to the rhythm of living and working somewhere else. And then you'll probably find by the end of that 12-month period that if you'd had any thoughts about going home, prior to that, you won't have any thoughts about going home after that.
Yes, there's always a transition period. As I mentioned, it's an emotional roller coaster, and it typically takes a year or 2 to fully settle. But I was reading through historical data the other day, and I seem to recall well over 92% of migrants are still in New Zealand after 5 years of arrival. So that tells you, you know, essentially how great a country it is.
We're pretty amazing, that's for sure.
Right. Okay. So I've popped our details on screen again for anyone to write down. But in any case, this webinar is being recorded, so all registrants will get a copy with the details in there. If you have any question regarding your eligibility for a visa, or if you want to discuss your migration prospects, you can email us at info@nzshores.com or newzealandshores.com. Both will work. And any question about employment opportunities, or if you'd like to start the process with actually looking for roles, you can contact the Crew team at Christchurch at crewconsulting.co.nz. Just a couple more questions before I close that off. Any portal where we can get information about how many visas are left out of the 600? No, I don't believe there will be any sort of publicly available tracking of these, but we keep an eye on that. Does the critical purpose visa require job offers from accredited employers only? Not at all. It can be any employer in New Zealand. They may be required to show that they've tried to recruit a New Zealander before they can hire you, but that should be easy enough considering the shortage in IT professionals.
Jump in there, sorry Fabian. We get that question a lot at the moment about accredited employers, and accredited employers, as a lot of people may have already researched, is actually about to change quite significantly. So prior to October last year, I'm trying to think, gosh, yeah, prior to October last year, there were a select group of employers who became accredited because they demonstrated to the government they had a large need to hire from offshore. That's changing. So from start of May, correct me if I'm wrong, Fabian, but start of May, all employers in New Zealand will need to be accredited. So that means they need to be approved by the New Zealand government to hire migrants. That's not something that will really impact you too much as someone wanting to migrate, but it's definitely more information that the employer has to provide. So everything we've discussed about applying for work visas and things will remain the same for everyone in this webinar, but the employer just has to jump through a few extra hoops. So anyone who knows anything about accredited employers prior to 2022, just kind of disregard that completely out of your brain for now.
This is all archive policy, no longer relevant at all, and really not something to keep on your radar up until July at least.
Yeah,
we can comfortably focus on those 600 border exemption for now.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you so much, Rachel. Again, if you have any questions following this webinar, feel free to keep in touch and we'll come back to you as soon as we can. Thank you, guys.
Lovely. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.